Good day, this is Mission Control Houston. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's edition of ISS Update, this Friday, February 8th. We're coming to you now live from inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where the team has been monitoring the systems aboard the station and supporting the day's activities of the Expedition 34 crew members. Leading the Orbit 2 team here in the Station Flight Control Room today is Flight Director Greg Whitney. Serving as a Capcom, Rob Hayhurst, responsible for relaying all ground messages up to the crew. And now aboard the International Space Station is commander of the complex, NASA astronaut Kevin Ford, with flight engineers Russian cosmonauts Oleg Novitsky, Yevgeny Turelkin, who had arrived at the station back in October of last year and are closing out their 108th day in space. To their right, flight engineers Roman Romanenko, Canadian Space Agency astronaut Chris Hadfield, and NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn arrived at the station in late December and now close the week with 50 consecutive days in space. And now for a look back at this week in space. On Monday, Commander Kevin Ford had performed plumbing on the waste and hygiene compartment in the Tranquility node. Following that work, he conducted a monthly fitness check and began work to upgrade the high-rate communication system. Canadian astronaut and flight engineer Chris Hadfield spent some time on two ongoing materials experiments. He photographed samples for the binary colloidal alloy test. Those samples consist of liquids containing microscopic solids and how they behave under various conditions. He also set up InSpace 3, a similar experiment, in the microgravity science glove box for monitoring on the ground. On Monday, flight engineer Tom Marshburn replaced a centrifuge in the cell biology experiment facility. He also did some plumbing work as he transferred water from the water recovery system to a contingency water container. The trio of cosmonauts were busy with research and upkeep inside the station's Russian segment. Novitsky and Turelkin partnered together inside the Zvezda service module, repairing interior panels. Novitsky took some time out for ocean photography for the Scener experiment, and Romanenko replaced dust filters and cleaned air ducts throughout the Russian segment. He also photographed landmarks on Earth for the Uragan experiment, which studies the impacts of man-made and natural disasters. And on Tuesday, flight engineer Tom Marshburn spoke to students from his native home state, speaking from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, North Carolina. The kids asked questions such as what it's like to eat in space and work in stiff spacesuits. Marshburn also spent most of his morning Tuesday on the fluids physics experiment. Capillary flow experiment. The study observes the behavior of fluids in microgravity. The results from that study could improve the design of fluid transfer systems on future spacecraft, such as fuel and water tanks. And on Tuesday, Canadian astronaut and flight engineer Chris Hadfield worked on a couple experiments, including the one targeted to students that demonstrated playing games or sports in space. Hadfield later powered up the microgravity science glove box again for the InSpace 3 experiment. Commander Kevin Ford spent most of Tuesday reconfiguring cables for the Joint Station Local Area Network. The cable work is in preparation for the installation of a new KU communications unit inside the Destiny Laboratory. Novitsky and Turelkin on Tuesday worked on the ongoing BAR experiment. That study tests new procedures and methods for detecting and locating pressure leaks on the space station. And Romanenko audited the availability of stowage space in the station's Russian segment. Also on Tuesday, the Expedition 34 crew received a special call that morning when Apollo 17 Commander Eugene Cernan visited Mission Control Houston. Cernan, along with several guests, called and congratulated the crew from the Capcom console. Then on Wednesday, the Japanese robotic arm attached to the Kibo laboratory was used overnight to inspect experiments located outside the lab module on the exposed pallet. Inside the vehicle, the six-member Expedition 34 crew began preparing for the launch of the SpaceX Dragon resupply craft, inspecting safety gear, and conducting international science. Commander Kevin Ford held a conference with specialists on the ground discussing items to be packed, stowed, and returned aboard the Dragon capsule when it arrives next month. Ford also worked throughout the day loading new software inside an express rack which houses multiple science payloads. He then performed some plumbing work, replacing a recycle tank inside the water recycle system. Also on Wednesday, flight engineer Chris Hadfield continued his work on the ongoing physics experiment in InSpace 3. Flight engineer Tom Marshburn inspected portable safety gear, such as oxygen masks and fire extinguishers. He inspected the gear located throughout the space station. Also on Wednesday, flight engineers Oleg Novitsky, Yevgeny Turelkin, and Romanenko continued auditing the availability of stowage space and worked ongoing science and maintenance. Then yesterday on Thursday, the cosmonauts and flight engineers Oleg Novitsky and Roman Romanenko practiced for the Progress 50 resupply vehicle's arrival on the telerobotically operated rendezvous system, also known as the Toru. The Toru allows a crew member to control and dock a vehicle in the unlikely event the spacecraft's automated rendezvous system fails. The original captain of the USS Enterprise, Captain Kirk William Shatner, called the International Space Station Thursday morning for a chat with flight engineer Chris Hadfield. The duo had talked about the risks and benefits of space exploration and Chris's home in Ontario. Afterwards, from inside the Kibo laboratory, Hadfield chatted with visitors at the Canadian Space Agency headquarters in Quebec. Also on Thursday, Hadfield, with assistance from flight engineer Tom Marshburn, participated on the NeuroSpat experiment. That study observes brain processing and spatial cognition in microgravity. Hadfield also continued more runs with the InSpace 3 experiment. Then on Thursday, Marshburn performed a fitness test to ensure satisfactory cardiovascular health and performance. Marshburn installed a hydrogen sensor in the oxygen generation system. He also installed a gas mass flow controller to ensure power and nitrogen flow inside the total organic carbon analyzer to prevent its failure. On Thursday, also, Commander Ford continued loading new software inside an express rack which houses multiple science payloads. He then performed a hearing test on himself and later conducted some plumbing work, assembling a water transfer pump. And finally today, Friday, Commander Ford began installed new software to the Science Experiments Express Rack 5. He then spent much of the day routing cables as part of an upgrade of the onboard high-rate communication system. Meanwhile, today, flight engineer Chris Hadfield continued this week's work with the science experiment known as InSpace 3. InSpace 3 again looks at the changes of physical properties of colloids in fluids in response to magnetic fields. This research has possible technological application in structure design here on Earth, including large-scale structures such as bridges and buildings to better withstand earthquake forces. Also today, Hadfield spent some time to stow away the equipment used for the NeuroSpat experiment and saved data from yesterday's test runs. Hadfield and flight engineer Tom Marshburn reviewed and gathered pre-pack items for return to Earth aboard the next Dragon resupply ship. That supply ship is due to arrive at the space station next month. Also today, Marshburn performed a variety of maintenance tasks to the onboard cold storage equipment. He reconfigured valves within the station freezer, the minus 80-degree laboratory freezer, and also installed a sensor harness to the Merlin. This is the microgravity experiment research locker incubator that provides a thermally controlled environment for scientific experiments. It can be used as a freezer, refrigerator, or an incubator. And today, on Friday, Marshburn also performed maintenance to the waste and hygiene compartment to remove and replace the pre-treat tank. Meanwhile, on the Russian side of the house, Russian flight engineers Oleg Novitsky, Yevgeny Tarelkin, and Roman Romanenko divide their day between maintenance and several experiments. The Progress vehicle, now docked to the Pirs docking compartment, known as Progress 48, is scheduled to undock tomorrow morning at 7:15 a.m. Central Time. The departure of the resupply ship will clear Pirs for the arrival of the new Progress resupply ship. That supply ship is Progress 50, that will launch on Monday will arrive at the space station on Monday afternoon. That Progress 50 is set to launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on Monday at 8:41 a.m. Central Time. And that's a wrap-up of this week aboard the International Space Station. This is Mission Control Houston.